Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Thank you for coming back to my channel. In this video, I'm asking, what is a terrorist? What is the definition? It's a term that's bandied around so much to try and delegitimize opposition. I realize that terrorists exist and terrorism is a real thing. But the trouble is, it's only ever the other side of terrorists, never one's own side. I'm sure you've heard the very jaded trope that one man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. I remember hearing that 30 years ago. Remember in Lower Chapel, our chaplain, the Reverend David Cooper, who'd been in the British Army, been a chaplain in the parachute regiment, would like people to believe he was a paratrooper himself. He wasn't. He'd been infantryman in another regiment. And I was impressed that he had that objectivity and such detachment to recognize, though, that he regarded his foes as terrorists, others did not. And people on that side, of course, because a terrorist is a bad thing to be, and therefore nobody chooses to fight for a cause which he believes to be evil. And likewise, being a counter-terrorist or whatever, or being part of, yeah, that's a good thing to be, and so that's what people call themselves. Anyway, this is so often misused. Now, Hayat Tahrir Al Shams, they've been listed as a terrorist organization by many other countries, by the late and unlamented Assad regime, by the Russian Federation, others, by His Majesty's government, the United States government, and many more. And now the British government is publicly musing about removing it from the list of terrorist organizations. And the Secretary of State can just sign something into being a prescribed organization and take it off. Like, for example, the Wagner private military company, those Russian mercenaries, they're a prescribed organization. Displaying a logo of these things was a crime. Which I know, much though they're very distasteful, loathsome people, I don't think that should be a crime. Just like in Northern Ireland during the conflict, there were people who displayed pro-IRA, INLA, pro-loyalist terrorist symbols. I want a free society. And that's why we've got to uphold that, including the right to say that. Indirect incitement to violence, okay, of course, should be criminalized. But the term terrorist is so often misused. Like in Zimbabwe, this is about 20 years ago, the British Broadcasting Corporation was outlawed as a terrorist organization. Shows just how preposterous this can be. And it's very worrying in the United Kingdom to see the narrowing of the Overton window of groups then called extremists or supposedly supporting non-violent extremism. And these are often human rights organizations, particularly those speaking up for the rights of children, trying to defend the most vulnerable people in our society, whilst actual terrorists get away with it, armed, funded, trained, defended, advocated for by the state. So it really is sickening. And it's the most oppressive regimes which tend to label the most people terrorists. Terrorists, according to the Syrian government or the Russian government, that's journalists in plain language. So anyone who's not with us is against us, and then it's like that. So terrorism, according to the Terrorism Act of the United Kingdom, is unlawful violence anywhere in the world in furtherance of any ideological, national, religious, social, or other cause. So that's it. And it can be state terrorism, even if the president of the country orders it, is carried out by government forces, by people in uniform, by the army, the police, or whatever. It can be terrorism because this is one of the difficult things. As Leopold von Ranke said, a state has a monopoly of violence within its own borders. Well, it doesn't have a total monopoly. There's always a little bit of crime and so on. But the army, the police, and so on, they're authorized to use force when other people aren't, especially premeditated force. So I recognize that. And they can use that legitimately, they can use that legally and so forth, but they mustn't use it excessively. And then it's a very tricky balance, and inevitably they get it wrong sometimes. But what you saw in Syria and places like Russia and many other countries, Uzbekistan, is a grossly excessive use of force against people whom they know are no threat, whom they know are civilians, doing on a huge scale and so on, and not occasionally, not just one few bad apples, when it just becomes routine. And obviously that is state terrorism, the sort of thing that Israel is meting out to the civilian population of Gaza and getting away with it, and then being armed, funded, and defended by the United States, by other Western governments, by votes in the United Nations, where the US facilitates this kind of thing. So there can be state terrorism. Now, Hayat Tahrir Al Shams, as in this movement for the liberation of Syria, Certainly, just because Assad was evil, and he certainly was evil, that doesn't automatically mean that the new people are good. We shall see. Now, some of them were on the Al Nusra Front, which was an Al Qaeda affiliate. Of course, people can change. I realize there can be rehabilitation and forgiveness and so forth. So some people supported Assad because it was the only thing standing between them and a medieval barbarism of Al Qaeda. On the other hand, there were some people, particularly if they're observant Sunni Muslims, who would support the Al Nusra Front because it's the only thing standing in between them and the Assad regime, who are gassing civilians. 500,000 people killed in this 13 and a half year civil war, most of them civilians, most of them killed by Assad's forces, often deliberately killed. So and we've got to support them despite our reservations, despite the bad side. There's the my side bias. Let's overlook the bad things done by my side. Let's deny it or downplay it or excuse it. And then the other side, anything they do, let's exaggerate the scale of the wrongdoing, the severity of the wrongdoing, and we'll really emphasize that and say it's inexcusable. So just not having how to put it, consistency in the way with what we deal these things. So yeah, that's it. The Assad regime is gone, never ever to return. But I'm wondering what's going to happen now. And so more and more organizations put on so-called extremist lists, like in the United Kingdom. Then the toxic masculinity, that's the thing. Misusing education, the miseducation that's inflicted on children these days is about indoctrination, not education. Brainwashing people to say this is terribly bad and toxic masculinity is terrible. And I agree. And actually, I do dislike it as well. It depends what the definition is. Comes to be more or less all masculinity, all male heterosexuality is the problem. Um, when we should be teaching people facts and allowing them to make up their own opinion, providing the range of opinions, and not having this incipient totalitarianism. Well, the government will choose, and you shall believe, and that's it. And then things are so-called extreme are going to be criminalized, expressing dissident views, subscribing to dissident views. It's a very worrying path down which the United Kingdom, other Western countries are going. In the Republic of Ireland, our right to free speech, that has been severely curtailed in the last few years, and that's very troubling, as well as the establishment has stepped up violence against children, which is sickening. And then when we try and save a child, he or she is going to be criminalized. So we should not start down this path. You can see where it leads. What happens in oppressive regimes like the People's Republic of China or with the Taliban taking over, of saying that certain expressions are impermissible, and dissent being criminalized. There's such a thing as a thought crime, treating people as terrorists when they're not, misusing counter-terrorist legislation, taking away civil liberties, depriving people of their right to fair trial, the sort of thing which happened under Tony Blair. Um, and this outright assault on civil liberty, become a surveillance state. And it's happening more and more, stopping and questioning Craig Murray about going to demonstrations in Iceland, which is perfectly legal. It's none of the police's business. Back off. Yeah, it wasn't any secret what happened. They don't catch actual criminals. What they do is they harass human rights activists. They harass dissidents rather than going after people who are dangerous. So I used to be very pro-police, but I've become very dispirited, very critical of the police in recent decades. Anyway, it seems to be the depths of cynicism that Hayat Tahrir Al Shams was evil last week. All of a sudden, they're okay. I mean, what? Make your mind up. And obviously, then there really are terrorist regimes in office, but then that's their sovereign equality. That if you have to deal with these governments, they're in charge, and Tahrir Al Shams, they are in charge. So if you want to have any sort of interaction with them, you're going to have to recognize them. But I mean, the most cynical of all is the Moscow regime, which up until now saying Hayat Tahrir al Shams were the worst of the worst, and in a desperate attempt to hang on to their naval base at Tartus, they now being willing to sup with the devil, as they would see it. Right. Thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate on PayPal, georgecallahan79 at gmail.com. Goodbye.